It's good to do things occasionally that are kind of creative, things that you're interested in, things that make you happy. Because honestly, in a class like this, where we're learning how to use a technical drawing tool, I'll be honest with you, there's not a lot of opportunity for creative expression. A lot of the assignments we have you do, you have to draw specific things at exact sizes so that we know that you understand how to use the tools properly, because that's what would be expected of you if you're going to use a CAD tool like AutoCAD as part of your occupation. Okay, so play around, practice, draw things that you want to draw, just so that you keep your proficiency with the different tools, and it'll also keep your interest level higher if you get to make some stuff that you want to make once in a while, even if it's just goofy stuff like this little face here. So let's make a brand new file, and I'm going to do that by clicking on the button for new drawing, because we're kind of interested in knowing how big things are, or at least we should be. If this is a technical drawing class, that means we're drawing things that are going to be built, fabricated, manufactured, right? And we need to know how big stuff is in order to draw it properly, right? So I'm going to click on erase and get rid of all this stuff. And we're going to talk about how can you figure out how large things are. Now, it becomes a little tricky when we realize that the zoom tool, when you're zoomed in, things look big. But when you're zoomed out, things look small, right? Big, small. So how big is it really? Well, it is a specific size in AutoCAD, and we can kind of work with the sizes in AutoCAD if we use some of these tools. And the tool I'm looking at specifically is the first one down here on the status bar. It's called Grid. So right now we should have all of these tools turned off. I'm going to click on the Grid button, and I see a light grid pop up in the background. Now, it might be hard for you to see this on the recording, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the colors a little bit. You don't have to do this, and actually it's probably better if you don't. But I want to set it up so you can see my colors a little bit better. I'm going to make my grid look like graph paper. And graph paper has blue lines, and graph paper has a white background. I'm going to apply that. Okay, so now this looks more like a sheet of graph paper that we might have drawn on at some time, right? And we see if we zoom out, well, the grid looks smaller, and if we zoom in, the grid looks bigger. But how big is the grid, right? This is a good question. So we can specify how big we want the grid. We just have to ask AutoCAD, pretty please, and it'll take care of that for you. So here's how you do that. Down on the status bar, here's the grid button. We're going to go to the little black arrow next to the grid button and click it. And then we're going to go to the settings that control how big the grid is. So now let's look at the right side of this box. We're going to talk about the grid. The grid is on right now, and the spacing on the grid is ½ inch spacing, 0.5 inches, right? So that means every one of these little light blue squares is 0.5. And it says it's making a darker line, a heavier line, every 5 spaces, or every 2.5 inches. Okay, so now if you can click inside a box, you can change its values. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to change the value to 0.25. And then hit tab, and that'll make the Y spacing equal. So now I want 1/4 of an inch in between each of these light blue lines. Now on your screen, if you have the black background, these will be the lightest lines on the grid. And then I want to change this major line nonsense from 5 down to 4. So basically here's what I want. I want to have a dark line every inch and lighter lines every 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'll go back to those grid settings and take a look. So the grid is on, 1/4 inch in between each of the minor lines, the light lines. 4 minor lines will become a major line. So every 4/4 I'll have a dark line, and that's an inch. Now there are a couple of other things I might want to play around with. This is probably the biggest one, adaptive grid behavior. We want to turn this off. Okay, so our changes that we see on page 913 in our course pack, if we're working with the grid, is we want to set the grid to the increment we need, set the major lines to the increment we need, and we need to uncheck the adaptive behavior. And then I'll hit OK. And then what happens is we can see clearly as we zoom in and out every quarter of an inch, and we can also see clearly every 1 whole inch. Okay. So now, with that being said, if we know how big things are, and we can control the spacing on the grid, if I gave you something specific to draw, well, we should be able to do it now. So here's the assignment that I give my classes. I call this circle in the square. Okay, and here's what we're looking for. We're looking for a square. We're looking for a square 5 inches by 5 inches. And then inside that square, we're going to come in a 1/2 inch from each edge and draw another square, and that will give us a 4 inch by 4 inch square. We're going to draw a diagonal line from the corner to the corner and across from the other corner to its opposing corner. And then when that's all done, we're going to draw a circle, and the circle will touch each edge of that 4 by 4 square perfectly. And that circle's got a radius of 2. So from the center to the edge, there should be 2 inches. So what I'd like you to do is scribble that down and record it in your brain. And then we're going to go back to AutoCAD and we're going to try to draw this now that we know how big the grid spacing is.